Hey, Originals listeners. The whole team at The Originals wants to wish you a happy holiday. What's that? Oh, you thought I was talking about Hanukkah or Christmas? No, I'm referring to Hot Cinema Sex Month, which is, of course, not just some made-up thing I concocted for this podcast episode, but something that happens every year, mostly everywhere, and it's usually celebrated alone. And who better to help with the festivities than today's guest, Jennifer Tilly. Some of you will claim that the hottest sex scene on film was in 9.5 weeks, but please, you can keep your refrigerator feeding scene. Please keep food out of my sex scenes. I want to be able to concentrate on these hot-ass characters, not think about the brutal workout they're going to have to do afterwards to burn off all that pasta and whipped cream and Jell-O they've been eating. So for my money, the hottest seduction scene I've ever seen in a movie theater is from 1996's Bound, the debut feature from the Wachowskis, the siblings who would go on to make the Matrix films. You're about to hear two voices. Gina Gershon playing the butch building super, Corky, who is summoned to rescue an earring from the drain by Mob Mall Violet, played by Jennifer Tilly. Violet thanks Corky for the help with a cold beer, and then they play the old, you show me your tattoo, I'll show you mine game. And I will note, the tattoo Violet mentions is a rose on top of her breast.
I have a tattoo. Would you like to see it? A woman in upstate New York did it for me. Do you like it? Took her all day to do it. She promised it wouldn't hurt, but it was sore for a long time after. I couldn't even touch it. But now I love the way it feels. Here. Touch it.
What are you doing?
I've been thinking about you all day.
You planned this whole thing. You got that earring down sync on purpose, didn't you?
If I say yes, will you take your hand away?
No.
Yes. Oh, please, Corky. Please. Kiss me.
Well, I feel like the head of the Originals HR might be calling me into his office tomorrow to talk about that. Anyway, out of abject fear for this particular cultural moment and deference to my marriage, I'll just say I've been a big, big fan of Jennifer Tilly's work for a very, very long time. Several years ago, when she was doing a Broadway show, Jennifer Tilly summed up her career thusly for her Playbill bio. She was nominated for an Oscar for her role in Woody Allen's Bullets Over Broadway and has a cult following from Bound, but people remember her mostly as Bride of Chucky. After tonight's performance, she'll probably be playing poker. We're going to be talking about all those things, but we'll start with Chucky, the campy horror franchise created by Don Mancini. Since 1998, Tilly has done 4 Chucky movies, playing Tiffany, the doll's main squeeze, as well as playing a version of herself, as you'll soon hear. Now she's returned for the new Chucky series, which I have to say, both my 11-year-old son and I totally enjoyed watching. It's on SYFY and the USA Network. This is The Originals, and I'm your host, Andrew Goldman. I spent decades interviewing celebrities for magazines, the vast majority of whom shared very little of themselves. I created The Originals to interview cultural figures who actually had something to say, wanted to truly share of themselves. And even if you don't consider yourself a Jennifer Tilly superfan like myself, be patient. I think you might be converted by this episode. Welcome to the 7th episode of the season, produced in proud partnership with Los Angeles Magazine. Jennifer Tilly, welcome to The Originals.
Thank you I'm very happy to be here.
The first thing I want to start out with is Chucky, the series. which I knew very little about. I know Chucky. I'm honestly not a horror fan. I saw the Chucky movies when I was younger, but I started watching the show because I wanted to interview you, and I started watching it, and I'm an episode in, and my 11-year-old son comes in, and he's really taken with it, and I'm watching the show, and I'm like, this show is pretty good. And I'm watching the first episode, and I'm like, where's Jennifer? When's she gonna come in? And then we watched another episode, and I'm like, this episode is fantastic too. And by close to the end of the second episode, I'm like, where the fuck is Jennifer Tilly, for Christ? All right, I've had enough of these Euphoria kids. Give me an adult. Where is Jennifer Tilly? Where is Tiffany?
Right. Well, you know what? I cannot believe that they didn't give you an episode that I was in, because I think they just released them. But I come in episode 5, and then I'm like full blast until the end of the series. And so they sent me on this publicity tour. But I did feel a little bit of imposter syndrome because I wasn't even in the first 4 episodes.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, until I see this episode, I'm actually not convinced you're actually in the show. That I think that they're just you're a marketing tool. They've just put your name. They've just put your name on this to attract the Gen Xers like myself.
Right.
Do you promise you're actually in this show?
I actually have a really huge part. And when Don Mancini came to me and said that he was creating a new television show, I was like, oh, I really hope I have a part in it. And in Cult of Chucky and Curse of Chucky, the last 2 Chucky movies, there was an edict that came down from high saying, make Chucky scary again. This is what they said: too funny, too gay, and too much Jennifer Tilly.
Oh my God.
So Don was like,
who said that? The studio said that?
The studio did. That's actually after Seed of Chucky, the Chucky movies started going straight to video. And so Don was like...
Just a second, Jennifer. Doesn't Don know he's not supposed to share that input with you, that the studio said too much Jennifer Tilly? You're an actress, for God's sake.
He's one of my best friends, and, we share everything. We actually thought it was funny that they thought it was too funny. In fact, there was a scene in Chucky that they made him reshoot because when he said that he was in Seed of Chucky, it's very meta. I play myself, Jennifer Tilly, international movie star, and I also play Tiffany, who is Jennifer Tilly's big fan. So there were a lot of really strange scenes where Tiffany is chasing me around the room and hitting me over the head with things and then saying,
Tiffany the doll,
Tiffany
correct?
The doll.
That you'd voice.
So it takes a lot of explaining, but there was a scene where I discover a dead body in the studio, and then I come out and there's all this paparazzi and they're taking my picture and yelling questions at me. And so the next scene is in the car, and I'm calling my assistant and I'm saying, turn on the TV. Did you see it? I'm all over the news. But I did it like I was really excited, like people are finally interested in me and maybe I can spin this into a movie or something. So I'm like, turn on the TV. I'm all over the news. They made them reshoot it. They said, oh, it makes her so unlikable. A person is dead. So we had to reshoot it where I was like, turn on the TV. I'm all over the news. So that's my sensibility is a little different from other people's sensibility.
So is that a comedic? I want to stop you for a second. Is that a comedic sensibility, or is that like a human sensibility that as an actress, getting that kind of attention is highly desirable, regardless of...
Well, I played Jennifer Tilly, the character, as a really narcissistic, self-involved diva from hell. We exaggerated all my worst traits to create this monster that is Jennifer Tilly.
But the thing about Chucky, which I find interesting, is like going through your press clips, it seemed like there's been an evolution with you. Now I look at your Instagram and you're actually posing with Chucky. But I feel like you had said before, you said that Chucky ruined my career and that Chucky had been, I don't know if you had any regrets about it. Have you had like sort of a journey with Chucky? Because it feels like you're totally leaning into it. It doesn't feel like maybe that was always the case.
Well, when I said Chucky ruined my career, this is what I have to watch. I have a self-deprecating humor, and a lot of times it doesn't translate in, on page. But I forget that everyone's not on the same page as me comedically. So when I say Chucky, because I say, Chucky kills everything. So I kind of was saying he killed my career. But there was like a kernel of truth in it, in that in Seed of Chucky, like I said, I played the worst version of myself. My career was thriving. I'd just done Liar, Liar. I'd gotten an Oscar nomination. And we made Jennifer Tilly sort of like, a broke down hoe. And so I was saying stuff like, look at me. I'm an Oscar nominee for God's sake, and now I'm fucking a puppet. So that was the character that I was playing. But people sort of thought that that was actually me. And in the movie, I was very obsessed with Julia Roberts getting all the parts that I should have got, which is like Julia Roberts and I only once in my entire lifetime were up for the same part, was Mystic Pizza. And then her career she went shot into the stratosphere. It's like, yeah, I'm not saying like Gwyneth Paltrow or Kate Blanchett are taking parts away from me. I'm never up for the same parts. Like, I'm more humble. I used to always say, I'm never the girl next door. I'm always the girl next door to the girl next door. Or, the strange secretary that has a secret.
What I found sort of interesting is that you actually have fully embraced Chucky, but not embraced it enough, because I think that you were on the stage of, it was some sort of Comic-Con thing, and you blew like the backstory, and you had to admit on stage that you haven't actually seen any of the Chucky movies that you weren't in.
Yeah, but I'm so rude. It's terrible. And Dawn's, because I say, when I'm talking about Bride of Chucky, I go, well, in the first one, I did something. He's always correcting me. He goes, Jennifer, there were 3 films before you came on board. And I'm like, not in my universe. But yeah, I still haven't seen them.
As you may or may not know, Jennifer's not the only Oscar-nominated Tilly sibling. Her sister, Meg, starred in The Big Chill back in 1983, then got her Oscar nomination for Agnes of God 3 years later, only to retire from acting in the mid-90s. So I assumed, incorrectly it turned out, that Meg was the older sister who welcomed her younger sister Jennifer into the business, since Jennifer's big breaks came several years after, when she played Gary Shandling's girlfriend in his first TV series, It's Gary Shandling Show, and in a small but memorable role as a hopeless singer in The Fabulous Baker Boys. It was just the opposite, in fact. Jennifer's actually 2 years older than Meg, and went to Hollywood a long time before her sister. Meg was studying to be a ballet dancer until she was sidelined after breaking her back. Now, given what happened when Meg went out to LA to visit, it's kind of a wonder that their relationship survived. In 1995, 9 years after Meg was nominated as Best Supporting Actress, Jennifer was nominated in the same category for playing Olive, a showgirl whose mobster boyfriend wants to get her a part in the Broadway show he's financing. And in this scene, in a dressing room stuffed with dancing girls, the tough guy actor Joe Vitarelli, playing Nick, the mobster, learns all about Olive's acting ambitions.
Olive, come on. Olive, it's our anniversary,
It's not our anniversary.
It's September 28th, 6 months to today.
So?
I remember like it was yesterday, because that's the morning we broke Joey Benjamin's legs, all right?
6 months.
Yeah, 6 months.
6 months, and I'm still stuck in this crummy rat trap.
Olive,
What?
I brought you something.
What is it?
Open it.
No, you open it. Can't you see I'm dressing?
I'll open it. Here, hey,
What is it?
pearls. What the hell do you think they are?
Pearls are white.
These are black pearls.
Oh, don't give me that. I never heard of black pearls.
Hey, just because you never heard of something don't mean it don't exist, all
What
right?
do you think I am? Some kind of chump? They're black, for God's sake. They probably came from defective oysters.
The pearls ain't sick, Olive.
You know, I assumed that your sister was the first to act, and then I was reading her biography, and she said, she was a dancer, and then she broke her back, and then she said, my sister Jennifer kind of took me under her wing in Hollywood, and...
Yeah, it was difficult for me. Like, I wanted to be an actress all my life, and then I went to college and I majored in theater, and then I came out to LA, and I was out here for a couple of years, like selling sandwiches out of a hamper, and I was working at the group repertory theater, like building sets and doing little plays and everything. And my sister hurt her back, and she came out to visit me, and she was like, oh, maybe I can be an actress like my sister Jenny. And of course I was like, I have a BFA in theater. It's not that easy. But for Meg, it was that easy. I made a fake resume for her. I was like, okay, like any high school play, don't say, I was in this high school play. I said, it's the Prometheus Players. And she was in Fame as a dancer. And I said, no, don't say I was an extra in Fame. Give your character a name, like Georgia or something like that. So she came up with a name. So I did that. And then I went in drama log and I said, oh, here's a part that we're both right for. Let's go in and audition. And she got it. And a top agent came to see that play, and Sean Penn was in that play also. And then the agent signed her, and a couple months later, she was starring in a movie with Matt Dillon, and that movie was Tex, and her career just took off. And I was still selling sandwiches out of a hamper, so it was a little bit hard, but in a way, it worked out really well because we're both in the industry. We've both been nominated for Oscars, and I have somebody that understands what I go through, and she had the same, and we've been so supportive to each other. But it was a little bit hard because back then now you have Rosanna Arquette and Patricia Arquette. You have these acting dynasties, but back then it was John Travolta and Joey Travolta, and then Sylvester Stallone and Frank Stallone. So it was like, I didn't want to be that tag-along person that was sort of like, I'm going to be like my sister, when it was kind of the opposite. But
were you rooting for her?
Oh,
or
absolutely.
You were.
And then perhaps it helped me because then people were a little curious, like, oh, Meg Tilly's sister, let's have her in and read for this. But at the same time, sometimes it was hard because I'd be up for parts and she would be up for the same part. And, she was a big star at the time. So obviously you have two sisters that are pretty much similar. You want the one that has the name value. But,
which one was Tilly first? Because Tilly was neither of your birth names, correct?
My mom, when she got divorced from my dad, whose name was Harry Chan, she was like, we're all going back to my maiden name. After that, she was married to another guy, her stepfather. So I was Chan, and then I was Ward. And then she's like, now we're all Tilly. And I was like, the whole family was going back to Tilly. So that was it. And then when I married my husband, Sam, I said, I've already had 3 names in my short life. I don't want to have a 4th name. Do you mind if I just keep the name Tilly?
Yeah.
And he was like, he's fine with it. So, so that's where Tilly came from. And my mom did say when we were Chan, when she wanted to change our name to Ward, which is our stepdad's name, because I didn't want to change then either. I think it was like 7 or 8. She said, people are very prejudiced against Chinese people. Well, my mom was for sure because she didn't like her ex-husband. So, but I remember I didn't even know Chan was a Chinese name. I remember I was 5 years old and I was at kindergarten or 1st grade, and somebody goes, "Oh, you're Chinese," and I was like, how do they know? I had no idea. But when we came to Hollywood, Meg said, and she was very wise, she said, let's just not mention that we're half Chinese, because she felt like people would put us in a drawer for ethnic actors and never open that drawer again, and we'd be typecast.
I just love the character so much in Bullets Over Broadway. And you got an Oscar nomination for it. Mm-hmm. I go back and look at that.
Bullets Over Broadway is one of my favorite parts that I ever played. And I think it's because I really understood Olive. I mean, she's like sort of a scrappy, scrubby girl from the wrong side of the track. And as my boyfriend in the movie said, oh, yeah, she used to, shake it in some hoochie joint back in Jersey and pick up quarters with her.
Do you know I learned recently that actually this was a thing. I think that Pearl Bailey actually did that early in her career.
Oh,
picked up quarters.
The only time I saw anything like that was when I was in Thailand, and it was someone's birthday, and then one of the girls blew out the birthday candles, but not with her mouth. I was like, oh, now that's talent.
I've heard of that. I've never seen a ping pong thing. God,
you probably don't want to see it. A friend of mine said they were in Thailand, and they said this girl came out and strutted around the stage, and she's walking kind of funny, and then she squatted down, and a little bird flew out, all bedraggled. It was sort of,
oh my God, really?
Sort of flew up to the rafters, recovering from the traumatic experience. I was like, I'm so.
Do you think that bird?
You
think that bird is like, yeah, this job isn't so much, but it's showbiz, baby.
Yeah. Showbiz. You take what you can get. Maybe it'll lead to something else. Maybe Spielberg is in the audience.
I've heard about these tricks. Does that make sense that somebody could blow a candle out? Is that like something that women understand?
I don't know. Well, they can shoot ping pong balls out. I think it has something to do with the Kegel muscles. You have to have tremendous control. I was up for, what was that movie with Paul Newman, the Lita Davidovich part, and it was a stripper. And I went in and I said, well, I don't know. It described very graphically how she swung the tassels on one boob one way and swung on the other boob the other direction. And I said, I don't know if I can do that. And that might have been why I didn't get the part.
That is asking. Do you think I've heard of the job of intimacy coordinator? Would you get it? Would you have to get like a juggler or something to help you with that? Or I mean, it just seems like actually a director asking somebody to do that would get them run out of the business. You probably have to have an actual
stripper, like Dancing with the Stars, how you have somebody come in and sort of, teach you the ropes. But yeah, that's a new thing on the set. When Fiona and I had our love scene, this is what's coming up in episode 5. I'm flipping through the script, I get it, and I'm looking at it, and then all of a sudden it says, Nika and Tiffany are having sex, and I was like, yes! Because, there comes a certain age in your career where you don't get any sex scenes anymore or any kissing scenes. And you're like, oh, I remember those. Yes, I used to have them all the time. So I was like, oh, I love Don. He loves Tiffany. And he has this idea that Tiffany never ages. And so when Tiffany arrives in the series, she's super hot and sexy and running around killing people just like normal. She's not like with a cane or a wheelchair. She's just in her 5-inch high heels walking around killing people. So it's kind of fantastic. But I've kind of been out of the business for a very long time. And so then somebody called me up and said, hi, I'm the intimacy coordinator. I'm like, the what? And she goes, yes, I'm going to sit down with you and Fiona and make sure nothing untoward happens. It's like, it's Fiona. We're both girls. I was like, I don't think that's necessary. But that's a new thing after the Me Too movement that they have incorporated on the set. So I have to say, I was pretty surprised.
Was it worthwhile? Because, I mean, sometimes when I hear, I haven't yet read a great piece on what an intimacy coordinator does. Mm-hmm. And is intimacy coordinator, is this like a racket? Is this somebody who comes in and is it value?
I don't think it's a racket. Perhaps it's necessary for younger people who are in the business. Like, I remember when I was first starting out, I had a no nudity clause, and the director came in my room and shut the door and spent 40 minutes trying to convince me to do nudity. Yeah. And I was like, I have a no nudity clause. And then I came out of the dressing room and the crew was all standing around and I felt like they were thinking I was being unprofessional and refusing to do nudity. But I had a no nudity clause, and thank God I refused to do nudity. It was a terrible movie. But I've done nudity since. But, there's artistic nudity. And for the most part, I've never actually had a problem. But what they do is they're sort of the referee. So I guess they're there if you need them. And maybe if you hate your co-star, then you kind of talk to I do not want him to touch me on my butt and I do not want any tongue. But, you can usually suss out. You can suss out what actors want to do a little tongue and what actors don't want to do any tongue. There was only 2 times where I felt kind of somewhat sexually harassed. Once I was playing a character that wasn't supposed to be the romantic interest at all. But, of course, I was incredibly sexy in my sexy costume. And the director, who was also an actor, said some inappropriate... I'm not going to say what he said, but he'd look at me and then say something really raunchy, like what he wanted to do to me. And then he's like, and roll camera. And I'm like, ew, I'm so grossed out. And then once he grabbed me during the scene, I guess he was feeling it, and he started kissing me and talk about tongue. I mean, his tongue went all the way down to my ovaries, and I had all this red lipstick, and he pulled away from me, and my whole face was covered with red lipstick, and it was really disgusting, and the makeup people were so grossed out. They were like, he should have told us he was going to do that, and we would have put the stain on that doesn't spread. But, okay, that was the one movie, and then the other movie was when I was first starting out, the guy trying to talk me into doing a nude scene. And then after that, I never had really any problem, just like got a lot of respect. And I think sometimes if you're there and you're kind of street smart, like, hey, buddy, I know what you're up to, then they don't try anything.
I was reading an interview with your sister Meg from many years ago, and I had to laugh. And she's, she talked about like the perils of being famous, and she said, I wouldn't wish fame on my worst enemy. And I was thinking about like all my worst enemies, and I was thinking about all the things that I've wished for them, and I'm like, I hope that motherfucker gets like a series on HBO and is like on the cover of Variety. I hope that, I was thinking
I guess I'm an anomaly because I love fame. I love my fans. I love the paparazzi. I love getting a good table at a restaurant. I mean, all my life, I just wanted to be a really big movie star. And I know that's ignoble ambition, but remember Sally Field said, you like me, you really like me.
Yes, poor thing.
They go, that's the difference between Sally Field. Some people become actors because they want to be liked, and other people, and I think they named Vanessa Redgrave, become an actress because they have a burning need to express the art in themselves. And I went, I'm Sally Field. That's what I want. I want to be liked.
Now, how many, come on. I guess there's, how many Vanessa Redgrave, are there? Do you think that, even Meryl Streep, you don't think Meryl Streep's in it for, the likes? You don't think that she's in it for...
likes?
No?
Can you imagine? Meryl Streep, I got 8,000 likes on this post. I gotta up my game. Can you imagine Meryl Streep, standing in front of a mirror in a bathing suit? Time for a bathing suit picture. Gotta get more followers.
But I wanted to say that because, and I want to say this in the least... gross way possible, but I rewatched Bound for this. This was one of the sexiest scenes I've ever seen, and I'm watching it and I'm thinking to myself, oh, it's a film set. There was all these people around it. It may be sexy for people watching it. It probably wasn't sexy for those two women who were doing
the thing is, I adore Gina Gershon. You were still really, really close, and it wasn't honestly usually sex scenes are pretty sexy. I'm also an anomaly because I'm one of the few people who will admit that I really enjoy sex scenes. You get to kiss people that's not your boyfriend. What's not to like? Yeah. But when we were doing that, Gina always jokes, but between takes, we were talking about the shoe sale at Barney's. And when I saw that movie, chemistry is a really strange thing. And I was like, oh my God, we have it. We have that magical thing called chemistry. And it's sometimes for example, apparently George Clooney and J-Lo hated each other, but they had incredible chemistry on Out of Sight. I've actually seen movies where I actually was having an affair with the leading actor, but up on screen, it's just dead. There's no chemistry, even though we had a lot of chemistry in real life. It's just this magical thing. Yes.
Who are you having an affair with that you had no chemistry with?
Oh. Don't want to say. In my younger days, I was like, wee, I'm on location. Hey, but you start to realize after a couple times when the relationship was over, because I was like, I met my next husband on the set. I didn't realize to the guy the relationship is over as soon as you leave Montana. So after a couple times, I stopped doing that. I realized it was a dead end road. But with Gina and I, when we were doing that scene, we were very concerned because Bound was a groundbreaking role. And people don't understand because there's a lot of films with lesbian content now. But back then in the 90s, the only lesbian content was Red Shoe Diaries and then, some independent sort of niche films. And so Gina and I were both really concerned about, nobody wants to be exploited. And the Wachowskis were an untested element. They never made a film before. And Dina De Laurentiis was the producer. And, he was kind of known for making a lot of, quickie films that would make money.
Well, there's a lot of boobs in his Italian films, right?
Yeah, in his Italian films. So the Wachowskis said they were going to shoot the love scene in one long uninterrupted shot. So Dino couldn't send it to Italy and put a lot of extra boobs and bums in the scene because, if they did one uninterrupted shot, then it's really obvious if somebody tries to cut in some more salacious material. And so that's why he shot the scene that way.
Well, if you see any kind of Skinamax movies that we used to call them, where there's there's a lesbian scene in the middle regardless of what movie it is. There's a girl on girl, and there's no boy on boy, but there is something kind of performative about the lesbians performed for straight people, right? And this, I think, lesbians actually watched this movie and they thought it was hot too, right? They thought it was legit.
That's when I gained my lesbian following, and I was very proud of it because I went to a women's college and the lesbians were the coolest chicks ever. We all wanted to be like them. Even to this day, people say, I realized that I was gay when I saw that movie.
Jennifer, as I was saying before, I like to watch people both when they win Oscars and when they don't. But I watched you when you were nominated. And you were against in the same category. I think it was 1995. It was the famous...
All I remember is The only thing I remember is keeping my game face on my poker face when they announced everyone knew Diane Wiest was going to win. And it's like, oh, my category is coming up. Time to put on my serene poker face. That's the only thing I remember.
I've heard you're a very good poker player, but that was not the best poker face I've seen. Because some people, and I think that this is a recent thing where when actors win, they've learned to like behave as though they were actually secretly rooting for the other people, and they jump up and they're like, oh my God, the other person won. But I feel like I saw in your face and Helen Mirren's face, and they cut away from you quite quickly, a little bit of disappointment. Understandably,
there was a wistfulness, yes, in my expression. I had a serene smile on, like, and she got up and she referenced me in a lovely way and everything. But I think it was easier for me because everybody knew that Diane Wiest was going to win. But I did, to a certain extent, I felt like it was a little unfair because, Weinstein, he put her in the supporting actor category. And I think by any definition, she was the lead. She's a romantic interest. And she had 3 times as much dialogue as I did. She should have been in the lead category. And I was pretty naive back then. I did not understand that the Golden Globe Awards, the SAG Award, all these things, you have to be submitted by somebody. And the studio wasn't submitting me because they wanted to clear the way for Diane Wiest. And I remember I kind of did my own campaign.
Well, Jennifer, this is what I understand. And this is, I think, what speaks to your ambition. And I think it's hilarious. Mm-hmm. So Harvey is famous for getting people Oscars.
Yes.
So there was Harvey was probably not only not campaigning for you, was he pissed? Was Harvey Weinstein pissed?
He was annoyed. Diane, she's a New York stage actress. She didn't want to do any publicity, but she's, brilliant. Her performance spoke for herself. They were taking out ads for Diane. Ostensibly, they were like, bullets over Broadway, but the picture would always be Diane. And I was like, 2 can play that game. And lucky the Weinstein company is so cheap because I remember the time a black and white ad was $700 and a full color ad was like $1,500 or something. So I was posting pictures of me on the set in black and white with Woody Allen laughing hysterically at something I said, and then I slapped the Weinstein label on the bottom.
Oh my God, that is so
it looked
devious.
like they were taking out ads for me. But
that is so awesome. So Diane Wiest couldn't have been particularly happy about it.
I honestly don't think she cared. I think she was a little like Woody Allen. She's an artist. She's not like, a fame whore like myself.
Tilly had a very difficult and weird childhood. After divorcing Tilly's father, Harry Chan, her mom married a guy named John Ward, and this big blended family spent years living off the grid and moved a ton before finally settling on Texada Island, this large rural island in British Columbia. In 1994, Meg Tilly wrote a novel called Singing Songs about one such family that suffered unspeakable abuse, every kind of abuse you can imagine, at the hands of a sadistic stepfather. And some critics thought it was just too shocking to even ring true. But several years later, Meg revealed that it was in fact a memoir, which was a controversial decision within the family. It's a very odd thing about memoirs, especially ones featuring more than one notable person. The memories and the consequences of sharing them aren't just yours, but the rest of your family's too. I didn't know much about your childhood. I read your sister's book, Singing Songs, and she described a life living on an island, and if the family wanted meat, they would have to hunt for meat.
That is true.
Incredibly poor, a big brood of children from a couple different marriages. But it was like one of the saddest. It was actually incredibly well done. And
my sister she's a very good writer.
But it was horrific, the stories of your stepfather.
Well, the thing is, number one, everybody has their own recollections. Our stepfather was a horrible person. I really believe that I don't believe in having a victim mentality. I feel like, I'm 63 years old now. I hate saying what my age is, but all those things happened almost 50 years ago. They don't define who I am. And my sister is a wonderful writer, and she felt the need to write this book, and that's that. But, I don't go around in interviews going like, yes, when I was 14,
it's very difficult, actually. I imagine it was not a popular decision because you're both notable people.
Those are the kinds of things, to me, that you tell somebody that's very, very, very close to. It's not like, if I was on a first date, like with a casual guy, and I'm like, guess what happened to me when I was 12 years old? They would would like run for the hills. But I feel like I call it the Oprah generation, where everybody is very open about, their traumas or addictions.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about their truths. And this is, my sister wanted to do this, and I totally support her writing this book, which was a very well-written book, but it doesn't have anything to do with my reality now. So it's like,
of course.
we
won't continue. I just want to say, if a tenth of that was true, I am so sorry, and you have come out.
A tenth of it is true. There is a thing called writer's embellishment. There was a little bit, and I do it too. Like if I'm telling a story, and the next time I say, the story would be funnier if the guy was wearing a hat. So the next time I tell the story, the guy's wearing a hat. And
was there a pet deer that ended up getting eaten?
We had a pet deer. We didn't eat it, as far as I know. But the deer did disappear. But I don't think anybody. Our stepbrother Tom was the one that went out and killed the deer. I don't think anybody is going to kill our pet deer. Yeah. But so we did have a pet deer. Did she say we ate it in the book? That might have been writer's embellishment. We would never eat our pet, although we did eat our pet rabbits because we got hungry,
Yeah. Tilly has had for many years a younger boyfriend, the professional poker player Phil Locke, who's often called the Unabomber in poker circles because of the sweatshirt and shades he'd wear at the table, make him look like the famous Ted Kaczynski sketch. But from 1984 to 1991, she was married to the television comedy writer Sam Simon. Now, if that name's familiar to you, it's because you've been seeing it for 32 years right under the names of fellow executive producers James L. Brooks and Matt Groening in the credits of The Simpsons. Though he only worked on the first 4 seasons of the show, the way television works is that if you co-create a show and it becomes the longest-running sitcom in history, you're bound to do quite well. As is the ex-wife who was at your side when you created it. Simon was diagnosed with terminal colorectal cancer in 2012 and then died in 2015. The year before his death, when the Writers Guild of America gave him a humanitarian award owing to his devotion and huge contributions to animal rights causes, Tilly introduced him. Here's Simon's response to her introduction.
I noticed you mentioned my check writing. I hope everyone realizes there's no one on earth more qualified to compliment me on my check writing.
Jennifer, so you married Sam Simon, and I always assumed that you were married to Sam Simon after he'd done The Simpsons, but you were actually married before you actually had a number, very high-profile roles. It was before you did Bullets Over Broadway, and it's before he'd done The Simpsons. He was a prominent writer. He'd been the showrunner on Taxi, very well-paid television writer, but... So you were with him when he created with James Brooks and Matt Groening The Simpsons, yes?
Yes, when I met him, I was just starting out. In fact, I think I got my first movie when I was dating Sam, which was No Small Affair. Demi Moore, Tim Robbins, and John Cryer. And I met Sam. He was doing a show called Shaping Up, and I was cast in Shaping Up. And he did it with his partner, Ken Aston. They both wrote Taxi. But yeah, when I met Sam, I remember he had a little apartment that cost $100,000 in Santa Monica, and we lived there happily as two little bugs in a rug. And then after that, he did the Tracy Ullman show. And I remember I tried to stop him from doing The Simpsons because I thought he was so talented, had so much potential. And James Brooks was kind of his mentor. He thought James Brooks was a genius. I don't know why. That's a joke because he is a genius.
Yeah.
But, Sam really felt like everything James Brooks touched turned to gold. And The Simpsons was just a little 1-minute bumper before it went to commercial. And Matt Groening at the time was a really sort of an outsider artist. He had I remember in LA Weekly, it was a free newspaper in LA, and there was a little cartoon strip that he was kind of known for with these weird creatures. I forget.
Yeah, Life in Hell, right?
Life in Hell. Yes. So anyway, Jim Brooks called him up and said, "I want to make a television series, a half-hour show with The Simpsons, and I want you to produce it." And I tried to talk him out of it because I was like, "Oh, Sam, you're so talented, and don't you want to do your own thing?" And Sam is obviously smarter than me. He goes, "No, I really want to do it. I want to go with this because, Jim Brooks is so talented. And he wanted to be part of Jim Brooks's stable." So he went on and did The Simpsons, and the rest is history. And The Simpsons took off, and was very good for him.
He did it. Well, he did it. Look, he did it for 3 seasons. He famously did not get along with Matt Groening, who basically called him both a genius and a psychopath, or something along those lines. Like he said, it.
If you read that book, what was it called? The Oral History of the Simpsons.
The Oral History of the Simpsons.
There was actually, there was a lot of bad feeling. I remember before it started, there was lots of good feeling, but I remember when they started to promote it. I saw which way the wind was blowing, and I was like, Sam, you have to get a publicist. He goes, no, Fox has a publicist. I was like, you have to get your own publicist, because they were sending Matt Groening out to do all the publicity. And Matt didn't even write a single script the whole first season. Like, the reason the show is so good is Sam brought over all these writers that he knew from Taxi, from the Gary Shandling Show, from Cheers, all these shows that he had worked on. So he brought
actually drew a lot of the characters, correct? He actually drew a lot of the characters.
He drew a lot of the characters. He drove
yeah.
over to Harry Shearer's house in the middle of the night to talk him into being on the show, and he hired the guy who did the music, the theme song for The Simpsons, Danny Elfman. I mean, Sam did everything. Sam felt like Matt was taking the credit, so Sam was the forgotten man, and he became quite unhappy with the situation. By the time he realized
he was
that
the
everybody
forgotten
thought
man?
Matt had single-handedly created the show, The Simpsons, it was too late. It was too embedded in everybody's mind. But since then, in the intervening years, the 30 years since then, a lot of people like Conan O'Brien and people have said that Sam was one of the geniuses behind The Simpsons. So he kind of did get his due eventually.
Well, I didn't think that was even in doubt. Well, I could see how he might have thought. Did it make him crazy?
At the time,
and is that why he left?
Then, at the time, nobody knew who Sam was, and Matt was getting all the credit. Now it seems hard. Now everyone knows about Sam, but at the time when I was married to him, it was very sad. Sam was hardly ever mentioned, and Sam was. He felt bad about that. So it did. It made him crazy. It made him crazy. And Sam can be difficult. A lot of people will say that he can be difficult.
Well, that's what I was going to say. He even there's a very admiring documentary about him, and even like his closest friends call him mercurial. And he says that
Sam always wanted a big funeral, and he wanted everybody to get up and tell funny stories. He wanted a funeral to be like a roast. So, there were hundreds of people that wanted to speak, but I got the funniest people. And even Jake Hogan got up, and his speech was so full of affection, but he basically said Sam didn't get along with anybody. Everyone was laughing because they knew it was true, but he was saying it with great affection.
You see interviews with him, and he very clearly said, Jennifer comes with me to all of my chemo. Jennifer is my ex-wife is my best friend. And I thought to myself, well, why are they not still married? What was he difficult to live with?
We were very young when we got married. Sam's super type A personality, and he kind of wanted me to be a stay-at-home wife. He wanted me to have babies, which when we met, we were like, we're so alike. You don't want kids? I don't want kids. But I think
that changes.
Secretly wanted kids. Yeah. And at the point where I felt like I had to leave, he was like, let's face it, you're 30 years old, and if you haven't made it now, you're never going to make it. You need to stay at home. But he was more supportive of my career than anybody. He got me an agent, he got me a publicist. He was very supportive of my career, but he didn't like that I would go away and I'd be gone for a month, and he would come home and he'd say, I was just at, so-and-so's house, and his wife made lemonade from scratch and made us sandwiches and cut the crusts off. And I thought, I wonder if Sam wants me to cut the crust off his sandwiches. And I was also, all the other producers had wives that were basically professional wives, and they would rearrange the furniture and they throw fabulous parties. And I was sort of like a little grubby hippie kid that I didn't know anything about society or being a good wife or anything, but I really didn't want kids. I remember Robin Wright got the lead in Robin Hood, and then she got pregnant. She had to drop out. And I remember Annette Bening got the part of Catwoman that Michelle Pfeiffer ended up doing because she got pregnant. And
kidding.
Yeah, and it sort of derailed her career briefly. So I was looking around. I was like, I must never get pregnant, because when I'm about 3 months, Scorsese is going to come calling and I will have to say no. So Sam wanted to start a family and have kids, and he is difficult, but he was a total workaholic. And I didn't see him as much as, I wanted to, because he was almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at making sure that The Simpsons was a great success. But after we got divorced, He was literally my best friend. We were so close. We would travel together. When he had a girlfriend, he would kind of fade away for a bit because the girlfriends were kind of threatened by how close he was with his ex-wife. But the last 2 years of his life, he did not have a girlfriend. And when Sam got cancer, when he sat down with me and said he had terminal cancer, the doctor gave him 3 to 6 months to live. And so I felt like I had an opportunity to pay him back for what he did for me because obviously I'm very comfortable from The Simpsons. And I remember when he came over to my house, I was like, Sam, I want you to see my house. And he came to my house and he walked around and he was looking at everything. And he said, Jennifer, he goes, I'm really glad you're taken care of, which is sort of like a benediction. He said, I'm really glad that you're taken care of. And I felt like he had done so much for me. And one of the things that was hard in our relationship is when we were married, I couldn't do anything right. So now was taking him to the doctor and driving him to chemo and, buying him vegan food and buying him like comfortable, soft clothes to wear. I swear to God, even though it was a really sad time, I was so happy because Sam was finally allowing me to love him. And he was saying, I love you all the time. And I kind of don't remember him saying that very much when we were married. I mean, I was just really happy that I could finally do something for him. And he actually said that the last year of his life was the happiest year of his life. Oh. But,
I honestly don't know, frankly, if I were in your position, I don't know whether I'd be doing a damn thing except, it's been fairly widely reported that Sam has said that his take from The Simpsons was tens of millions of dollars every year. Mm-hmm. And your take from the estate was a third of that. So it seems to me like you would never have to work again. And
nobody knew The Simpsons was going to go on for trillions of years. They accidentally gave him like this crazy deal, but they didn't understand. It was like, because with my divorce settlement, in the beginning, I would get like tiny checks, like 4 times a year. Small, very, 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 very small. And then they started to get bigger and bigger. And after about 20 years, all of a sudden they started coming in really big.
Why do you work? Come on, go
This is what it did for me. And this was what I used to say. Oh, a lot of the movies I do is if you go into Blockbuster and there's a big barrel that says, any movie, 3 for $1. And at the bottom, my dad would fish these things out and watch them. I'd be like, ooh, don't watch that. Because I used to do a lot of movies because the roof was leaking or to pay for the plumbing. And now I don't have to do those movies. And then I realized those are pretty much the movies that I get offered, but I don't have to do movies to pay the rent. I'm so lucky I don't have to, do Cameo. Or go to Comic-Con or everything that I do now is things that I want to do. But I thought I kind of lost my desire to act. And the funny thing is, coming out of the pandemic when Don Mancini called me and said, we're doing the Chucky series again, I showed up on the set. I had my fabulous outfit on set and hair and makeup, looked great. Showed up on the set. I did my scene. After I finished doing it, everybody, the crew all started clapping. And then I realized I was so happy. I thought, I'm so past that where I need validation from strangers. But I realized, no, I really do. I need validation from strangers. I was like, I forgot how much I love that.
For several years, Tilly considered herself a professional poker player rather than an actress. And in 2005, she beat 600 other women to win a World Series of Poker bracelet and the $155,000 prize. She announced her retirement in 2008, but, as many players do, reemerged back at the tables in 2010. Her reported lifetime winnings? Over $1 million. Her lifetime losses? Excellent question. Hold tight for the answer. I was reading about poker, and I am not a gambler, and I've seen your sort of obsessive traits, and you quit in 2008, and you called it an addiction. Was this ever a problem for you?
Oh, yes, of course. It was. But, I feel like I'm in a really good place with poker now. Like, I remember my business manager used to put on my tax returns, actress/gambler, because I did win a lot of money playing poker. Like, when I won the ladies event, I won $157,000. So she claimed it on taxes. And one year she said to me, Jennifer, You have to win more money than you lose. Otherwise, I can't call you a gambler on your tax returns because I guess that had been a really bad year. So if you're a professional poker player, you're winning more money than you lose. Otherwise, you're just a gambler with a problem.
Well, I was actually looking at one of these poker magazines, and it talked about all these celebrated champion poker players who died broke.
Well, I think what gets you to the top is a sort of aggressive obsessiveness. There's a lot of poker players, especially from the poker boom, which started in 2005, who are like known as like the greatest poker players ever. And they're not only broke, but they're millions of dollars in debt. So it's weird because I don't want to glamorize it because there is such a dark side, a really dark side that I have seen to gambling. And I used to have a license plate that said degen, like the nickname for poker players that are really obsessive is degenerate.
Jen, I was reading that one of the issues that poker players have is that there's so much at stake when you're playing poker that when you go out into the real world, money, it doesn't make sense. Like you tend to spend tons of money because you've just been at the table betting tons. Is that right?
They say? They say easy come, easy go, and it's kind of true. Sometimes you're sitting at a table with huge amount of money in front of you, and the money sort of does lose its meaning. If the money has meaning to you, then you're kind of not as good of a poker player. It's called scared money. If you're like, oh my gosh, if I call here and I'm wrong, then I'm out this amount of money and that's what I need to, pay the doctor bill or whatever.
But doesn't this make you, and especially because I've been reading about bankroll, and bankroll, they've said, is the amount of money that you can afford to to lose. And I've also been reading about scared money, and basically if you have like an annuity that's coming in, don't you have like a huge bankroll? You can afford to lose a lot of money. And has that gotten you into any trouble?
I definitely don't. Like, I don't have as much money as people think I do. But, you have... it's the same thing, like some of the richest people I know. I went over to some producer's house. It's like, gotta have like 100 million, and he wanted to play $1, $2. So I think the thing is, I'm always trying to squirrel money away from my business manager, and then she's pretty disapproving when I'm like, can you wire some money to the Aria? Because she doesn't see it as a tool with which I'm going to gain more money. She sees it as money that is going to disappear. Even like if I buy jewelry, I'll say it's an investment because
you buy a lot of jewelry, I heard.
Not a lot, but it's like it's not like people go and they buy the Cartier love bracelet or like a Kathy Waterman ring. That's called fashion jewelry. Like when I buy things, it's like I don't have a whole lot of faith in the American dollar, like where it's going. And so I feel like it's in order to buy a tangible asset. I was very struck by the story of the Romanovs and, the horrible way they died. The Bolsheviks put them in a room and started shooting at them, but they had heard that there was going to be an insurrection. So they were preparing to flee, and they had sewn all their diamonds in the lining of their clothing. They were going to flee that night. So the bullets were ricocheting off the diamonds. So it took a really long time to kill them. But I was very struck by that. And I thought, if I have tangible assets, then I can flee if I have to suddenly flee the country, but it's very hard to convince my business manager that.
Jen, career-wise, how much are you down for your poker career? Do you have any idea? Because I assume everybody's down.
I honestly don't think I'm down.
Really?
The last few years, I've pretty much just been winning. But if you asked me a couple years, the 2 years that Sam was sick, and I do think poker is an emotional thing, I would just go over to, my friend had a game. I'd just go over and I'd buy in and I'd cry and I'd lose money and I'd drink. I mean, it was sad. Like I had to hold it together for Sam when I was taking him around and everything like that. But that whole 2 years I was taking care of Sam, I was pretty much a losing player,
Yeah.
It's almost like, how they say drowning your sorrows. Like some people drown their sorrows in alcohol. Some people drown their sorrows in sex. And gambling is the greatest way to drown your sorrows. I mean, as long as you're at the poker table, the whole rest of the world fades away. But turned out my mom and my dad, Harry Chan, that got divorced from my mom when I was 5. And I didn't see him again. I only saw him a couple times until I graduated from college. So I didn't know that he had a quote unquote poker problem. And you have genetic markers for gambling addiction, just like drug addiction or alcoholism. And I didn't know that. In fact, my dad is the one that gave me the World Series of Poker video game that I loved, which is I learned how to play poker on before. But apparently when my dad got married to my stepmom, she said, this marriage is not going to survive unless you quit playing poker. And so he loved poker, but he loved my stepmom more. So he quit. But I had no idea until after you passed away they had a poker problem. My stepmom goes, "Oh, you like poker? Here's a book that belonged to your dad." And it was Lansky's Theory of Poker. It was a paperback book. And he bought it back in 1960. And it was, the price I think on it was $99. Which is a huge amount of money back in 1960.
My goodness.
I think he got in the back of Esquire magazine like, "We'll give you all the secrets to winning at poker." And it was all dog-eared and highlighted. And I was like, oh my God, my dad was a degenerate just like me. I got it from him. And then my Aunt Marie said, my grandparents on my dad's side were really, really rich. And she said when my great-grandparents came to America, they came first class, not steerage or anything. So they were very, very wealthy. And my grandfather was going to UCLA to study medicine. And he had to cut his studies short and fly back to China. Why? His brother had gambled away the family fortune.
What?
Which was extensive, must have been extensive. So that's why my Aunt Marie was worried too. They were all like, "Oh my gosh, is she going to succumb to, the family?"
Yeah, Jennifer,
vice?
I mean, look, I don't know you, but you should never play poker again. This is like, you have so much to lose. You're gonna be like running away with all your jewels sewn into your dresses.
It is possible to gamble away the family fortune. I mean, it gets away from you really fast. So it's like if you have a wild stallion that you've broken, it's never really broken. You just always have to keep an eye on it so it doesn't revert to its bad basic nature.
Finally, your mother died. My parents are, my father died recently. There's basically well, thank you.
It creates a big hole that never.
Well, it does create a big hole, but it also, I was talking to a friend about it. It makes you feel like you have been living your life in the on-deck circle, and then all of a sudden you're like at bat for mortality. And I just wondered, going through that with Sam, have you learned anything about death?
I don't want to sound all weirdly new agey, but I believe that there's a lot of sort of parallel universes that are coexisting, because after Sam was gone, I felt like he was still with me. And I felt his energy. He came to me in dreams. Even when Sam was towards the end, he was saying, "The room is full of voices." He's like, "Oh, I saw my mom last night." His dog sadly ate some of Sam's drugs and passed away about a month and a half before Sam did. And Sam would say, "I see Gertie patrolling the yard. I looked out the yard and I saw Gertie standing there waiting for me." And so I really do believe that the soul is eternal. Especially during the pandemic, I wake up in the middle of the night and think about death and like, oh, it's going to be so lonely. And it's like, I like being here with Phil. I don't want to be in the void. But nobody knows what happens after you pass on. But I don't really think it's like a black curtain comes down and then there's nothing. I really don't think that.
It's so strange because you mentioned that my father, I saw you brought a Native American to try to treat Sam. And I said, oh my God, she and my wife would get on so well. Because this, if I got sick, I would imagine that there's going to be many shaman around. But, my father was he had none of that new age stuff. And he talked in the weeks before he died of seeing my mother and talking to my mother. It's very strange how these things happen, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you become more aware of eternity. I do believe that Sam's mother came to him. There were a lot of people in the house. And I remember I said that to the nurse. I said, "Oh, Sam says he's hearing voices at night." And she was a little Filipino, really spiritual. And her little hands flew to her face. And she goes, "Jennifer, I hear them too." So when my mom passed away too, there were a lot of spiritual, and also my dad, like my sister would see people in the room and we would hear voices. And so I really do believe, I believe that when I pass, it's not going to be a lonely frightening thing. I'm looking forward to seeing Sam again, and my mom and my dad and my grandmother. But sometimes you get really scared, and then you're like, what if I'm wrong? What if there's just like worms and blackness, darkness, and oblivion? I don't want oblivion. No, not me. I want, I'm the one that wants to be famous and celebrate, and I want glitter and glamour. I don't want oblivion.
All right. Jennifer Tilly, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you for being on the show.
So great talking to you too.
That's our show. If you liked it, subscribe, leave us a review, and tell the girl next door as well as the girl next door to the girl next door. This episode was produced by myself, Andrew Goldman, as well as Rob Heath, who, since I've known him, has been trying to get me to check out the Garfield tattoo he's got on his inner thigh. Special thanks to Whitney Tancred and Christy Osler at 42 West, my close friend and consigliere, Derek Lavallee, PR guru Lauren Kusarak, and the whole team at Kusarak & Company, as well as everyone over at Los Angeles Magazine, notably Silver Fox editor Marichon. The Originals is, as always, a highly replaceable production.